Dialogue management with Microsoft Teams, more than just a contact center, brought to us by Jon Quayle of Anywhere 365. Go ahead.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you everybody for coming. Good afternoon. It's an honour to have the shift after lunchtime for the first talk, but hopefully everyone's sitting comfortably. It's great we're in a cinema setting, but yeah, afraid we haven't got movies today, but hopefully there should be a good show when we do the demo later. Just by introduction, my name is Jon Quayle. I'm pre-sales consultant for Anywhere 365 based in the UK. I've been working in a new UK team, joined in April 2020, so we have very much done a virtual onboarding and grown quite quickly in the UK. It's great for everyone to be here in person. I think it's been quite a nice thing for us all to be able to get together for this conference at the moment. I was explaining to my wife what this session would actually be like a while ago, and the words that came instantly off my lips were, "It's going to be a real life webinar," which just shows where we've all been. So in terms of the title of this session, it's about dialogue management being more than just a contact center. And that's part of our DNA within Anywhere 365. We're going to sort of have a bit of a look at what that means for us, and we'll talk about it a bit as we go through. So just a bit of an introduction to us as an organization. We are a Dutch company. We're headquartered in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. We also have presences globally now. So everywhere you see a little city name there, we have someone physically located in region. We also have a global cloud leveraging Microsoft Azure. You can see those locations available there too, and that is also a number that's growing. We've seen quite a large growth over the last 18 months. We've been fully focusing on the transition to Teams. I think going back to 2019, what we were really looking at is this nice graceful migration as people moved away from maybe Skype for Business to Teams, and we had some time to build up our platform. But obviously 2020 happened. We saw this huge rush to Microsoft Teams, everyone working from home, and a large demand on Anywhere 365. And that's something we've been focusing on developing and building out for this last 12 months, really. We are an exclusively channel organization. And throughout our partner community, we've trained over 830 engineers in deployment and support of Anywhere 365. So we're not necessarily a really niche project. We have quite a lot of engineers out there globally that are familiar with the organization. We've also grown quite significantly by acquisition. We recently purchased Peter Connect. You may have heard of them as a Teams attendant console vendor, just to further bolster the product set. So what's dialogue management? I think we can kind of trace back the evolution of contact centers back in time. I think we all probably are familiar with the old call center, just the way of getting calls into agents. People started to call it contact centers after a while, a bit more of a friendly name, just representing the interaction you might have. But we now like to use the term dialogue management. The reason is we're not just about delivering calls to agents, we're about opening up your organization and managing all the conversations you might have with your customers or service users. What that means to us is it's not necessarily an agent being your first port of call. The first touch point someone may have with your organization may be an automated IVR. It may be a bot interaction that's giving you some information. The agent may ultimately answer that call. After the agent, resolutions for dialogues are often dealt with by someone inside an organization. So a good example of this is a contact center may answer the initial call. It may be passed off to someone in your finance department to ultimately answer that. Just because it's been a contact center call doesn't mean it ends the dialogue once it leaves the contact center. That's reflected in how we actually license our product. So if you purchase any Anywhere 365 platform, you have unlimited agent possibilities within the solution. You can enable your entire organization to be contact center agents. Just because they're not using all the tools and features doesn't mean they can't be an agent. What that means is that call that's forwarded to someone deep inside your organization has full traceability. We can trace every event as that call passes through the contact center, make sure it's answered in a timely manner. We also include omnichannel with that. So dialogue's great because we're not just looking at calls, we're also looking at text-based interactions. So those may come through on social channels, may come through with our included web chat that we have as part of the solution. We have enterprise routing and recording available at all levels. That effectively means we have more than just your simple IVR workflow. We have other ways of directing calls, and we'll have a look at how we can integrate into some of that. So some key benefits we have, we've already covered things like our advanced routing. One of the big things about Anywhere 365 is we love integrations. We like to build solutions that don't exist And where they do, we leverage those. We'll have a look at some architecture in a second, but we leverage Microsoft 365 to become the best contact center it can be. Teams is where we deliver calls and dialogues to agents, but we're leveraging that entire Microsoft stack that they make available to you. We also allow you to integrate with other solutions. Workforce management is a key part of that. They're rich ecosystems that are available there. We don't just want to rebuild our own solution and reinvent the wheel. We allow you to choose your own and integrate. Finally, one of the things we love integrating with the most is your data. Now, I don't know if anyone here has ever configured a lovely complex workflow. You probably realize you're actually creating a massive data footprint. And a lot of organizations already have that data available in a different way. We call them CRMs usually. So using this as a particular example, you have a CRM record. CRM records typically have the number of your customer. They also have the name of the person who's managing that account. That on its own is enough to route a call. We can use our advanced open API to be able to query that number when the call hits the contact center. We can also then make the routing decision to route them to the right agent without actually having to pass them through a complex workflow. So again, this is part of our philosophy of engaging customers well. So we don't just want to have the contact center as a necessary evil to get calls through. We want to delight your customers when they start to use that system. If we have a customer that's actually enjoyed the process of coming through the contact center, they're going to arrive in a good frame of mind when they speak to an agent. And that's how we use things such as skills-based routing. We always try and route to the agent that is best positioned to answer that particular dialogue. We'll use solutions such as machine learning and cloud AI to be able to route calls without complex IVRs. So we can replace entire IVRs with a simple question and perform natural language recognition, a similar experience to asking Siri a question rather than choosing 7 different layers of options. Product-based routing is, again, very similar to how we route with CRM. We can see a number that's come through, or we can see if it's come through on a particular endpoint related to a product. We can find people from your CRM who are aligned to that account and make sure they're answering the call correctly. So let's have a quick look at our actual architecture. Now, we're a direct routing contact center. We are certified as a connected contact center by Microsoft Teams. And the way we route calls in is primarily by using direct routing. You can also see on the right-hand side our Microsoft 365 inside that red square. Everything inside that square is inside the customer's tenant. I'm going to use a phone call as a brief example, and I'll take you through that process flow, and we can look at how that works for us. So hopefully this should give me a pointer. Here we are. So a phone call will typically originate from the PSTN network, maybe from a SIP provider, even ISDN, you've still got that, and it will reach a session border controller typically connected to direct routing from Microsoft. What we'll then do is route all of the contact center calls to our dialogue cloud. And that's where, there we go, lost the mouse. And that's where the call will ultimately be answered. We'll pick up that call and we'll perform any of the workflow settings we need to. So it might be that we get a bot to answer that call, or we might just route the call. The configuration we get to do that is stored in SharePoint, and that is deployed inside the customer's tenant. So we'll give you a SharePoint template. We'll poll that every 10 seconds and pass configuration from it. When that call routes to an agent, we use a few different data points to make a decision on how to route it, such as the skill applied to them and the previous calls they've already had. We'll also leverage Microsoft Graph API to check their presence. We always try and route to agents that are available. And that's a big difference to how legacy contact centers have worked. Tools such as Skype for Business and even bits of plastic phones on the desk, they were just endpoints for delivering calls. I think we can all agree over the last sort of 18 months or so, Teams has become the place we go to work. And contact center agents typically are involved in lots of other tasks than just answering calls. They might be in a Teams meeting, they might be set to busy because they've got another task on, so we track their presence to make sure they can answer the calls to manage their workload. And we'll always check their presence before we route that call to them. Same can be applied for asynchronous messages such as chat and email. Once that call's in progress and answered, we'll record it in Dialog Cloud. And when the call's complete, we'll upload that call recording to SharePoint Online. We'll record any metadata with timestamped events of that call into Azure SQL as a service, again, deployed inside the customer tenant. We then delete all of that cache data. We don't want to hold on to anything that's identifiable or the customer's data. So we give you the cloud with some control built in. We're leveraging a lot of the capabilities you're already paying for within 365, while also enabling it to be a full contact center too. One of the advantages of using SharePoint Online means we can actually be really granular in how we assign permissions. If you want to empower your contact center to be able to make their own changes, we can easily grant those permissions out. In terms of reporting, we use Power BI. Again, we like to leverage what's available to us. We allow customers to query their own data using the 365 toolset. So we're going to jump in and actually have a look at a quick demonstration, but more than happy to pause for any questions at this point before we dive in and have a look at the solution. If not, we'll get cracking. Great stuff. So I'm just going to switch my screen share over. Give me 1 second. Great stuff. So that should be good to go now. Excellent. So hopefully we all recognize this application in front of us as Microsoft Teams, and we can see the Anywhere 365 web agent here too. Now, rather than just, as we said, firing calls at Teams, we allow agents to have another application within Teams to control how their contact center works. So agents can still access peer-to-peer chat. They can access teamwork. So they can still use the chat-based workspace, document collaboration. They also even have access to their own personal calls. When they want to start to manage their contact center dialogues, they can open up the web agent. Now, this is consumed from our cloud, but it's integrated with Azure AD for authentication. So if you have things like access control policies, device endpoint control set up in Azure AD, that will automatically follow over to the contact center. Once this application is installed, wherever that agent signs in, they'll be able to access their contact center workflow from too. So there's not a lot going on here. We have quite a lot of screen space available. So let's push in a call and see how this goes. So call's coming through, and we should see that appear in our queue on the right-hand side. Great stuff, got quite low signal, and here's the call routed to me as an agent. You notice before the call has even come in, we've actually brought up some data. Let's answer that call just here. And we've just had a stale session kicks out. Let's jump back in. There we go. Just going to stop the feedback there. So here we go. We're connected to our call, and we can see we've actually brought up quite a lot of data here. Now, let's follow this over from left to right. We can see what's available to us. On the far left, we've got our CRM information. So for a normal agent, what we've done is match the number to a CRM system, in this case, Dynamics 365, and we've surfaced up some key data. So we can see the name of the customer that's called through. We can also see the company they are from. We can even have quick access to things like case history from here as well. So let's bring that up there as well. So quick access without actually diving away and going into your CRM system. We can apply our classifications while the call's in progress too. So if we want to classify the call with particular criteria, we can do that from here. Moving on, we can see some call control options. Now, this is a Teams call, so we can actually access it as it hangs out in its own window. But if we use these call controls within the web agent, we have full traceability. As we said earlier, every time something happens to this call, every time it enters a queue, gets answered or forwarded, we create a timestamped event. And using these call control options allows us to do that. We also have call control built into the application. Now, this isn't a replacement for compliance recording. This is just a simple way to record all the calls that cross our contact center, and we can manage that here. Just below that, we can see our timeline, and this will show us all the previous touch points this customer has had, and we bring that up for the agent straight away. Now, I was doing some testing earlier, so we can see quite a lot of missed calls from my number. If we saw that before a call routed to us, we'd probably have quite a good idea of the mood of the caller that was about to be put in contact with us. So while this call's in progress, we can speak to our customer, perform any call classifications. When it finishes, we simply just use our hang up button here to complete the call. Now, you're probably saying, great, another Teams application embedded within Teams, but we are also using the Graph Presence API to be able to do that. So just bear with me a minute, my VM is running slightly slowly. We can see here at the top right, we have our contact center presence. Now that is synchronized with our Teams presence. So this is telling me what the status of the contact center thinks I'm in to take a call. So as soon as I go into busy within Microsoft Teams, we'll notice that the contact center will update to busy as well. Now, this is great for just letting other people know what we're doing, but you generally need a bit more information for a contact center. So we allow you to actually align some reason codes with Teams presence. We can see down here that I have a few reason codes available. So let's just say I'm in a training session, for example. I let the contact center and our reporting know that I'm in training. Everyone on Teams can just see that I'm busy. And of course, that takes me out of the queue. As soon as I go and update my presence and set myself to being available, which I'll do here, you can see that that status is automatically cleared for me. We also like to empower agents to do as much as they can. So we can allow them to actually manage their own participation in the queues that they have access to. We can see here I'm in a large different range of contact centers. Some of these as a padlock, some of these as not. All the contact centers that are unlocked, I can actually sign in and out of myself by clicking this quick switch. So I can actually remove myself from the queue without interfering with my team's presence. This particular contact center has noticed that I'm the last available agent in a particular skill. So it's actually asked me to confirm that I definitely do want to sign out. We'll just cancel that to make sure all our calls are answered correctly. Let's finish this call. We can see we have an option to end conversation. I chose not to classify this call while it was in progress. So we should get a nice prompt to remind us to do that. We did a recent proof of concept around payment providers. So if we've recorded anything as a payment, we can click this button to classify it. It's also asking the agent to confirm that they've paused the recording. So that will go against that call record in our reporting, which we'll look at in a second. So we'll hit save, and that completes our call. Now, it's really nice having this embedded within Teams, but I'm sure those of you who worked with Teams before are thinking, what happens when you switch application? Will I lose my place? Will I go somewhere? Of course, most of our customers who use this do actually choose to pop this out from the Teams window and have it there floating to access as they need to. So that's our core agent handling. Let's have a quick look at how we actually control the contact center. We have two ways of doing this. The first way is using our SharePoint interface. This is a template that we give you as a customer or as a partner to deploy for your customers, and this allows you to control the contact center. This is the configuration for what we call a UCC, or Universal Contact Center in our terms. This is basically an inbound number or inbound endpoint, such as a chat endpoint, into a queue. And we allow you to break these up for your various different departments in an organization. This means you can give a contact center manager access to this. They're able to control the queue. They're able to control agents, skill ratings, even change things like voice prompts without impacting any other part of the contact center. We also have role-based access included too. This means you can allow your IT staff to remain control over all of the areas that might affect the service while also allowing them to support the contact center as they need to. So we won't dive in and spend too much time looking at all of these, but we can control things here like all of the call routing prompts. We can even change things like our opening hours and business hours for each contact center. And this is something that probably seems quite small to all of us as Teams guys here, though. Legacy contact center agents absolutely love being able to change their own opening hours. Typically, they all say it was a really big problem. Every Christmas, they had to report to the service desk and have some change made. In here, they can go and just do that themselves and choose out of hours numbers quite easily. That's our simple, friendly call flow. We also have another way of actually managing advanced interactions with Anywhere 365, and we call this Dialog Studio. Now, anyone here who's worked with IBM NodeRED will probably say this looks very familiar to you, and that's because that's the technology we've built this upon. This allows you to actually, let's just zoom out a little bit. I think we're using quite a lot of greedy screen space here. This will allow you to build those complex workflows that you typically might need to use custom development for. Using our nodes for the Dialog Studio, we're able to actually control the contact center and integrate with third-party solutions that don't have a connector. What we have here is a simple bot interaction that's replacing an entire IVR, and I can take you through this step by step to actually show you how it works. This is initiated by what we call an inbound node. This is activated when anyone calls the contact center. We're going to play a welcome message. And as soon as we play that, we're going to start off a transcriptor service. What this will then do is translate anything the customer says into text. We're going to send that to a cloud bot framework, and that's going to reduce whatever they say to an intent. So by intent, we mean that similar sort of thing you will use when we speak to Siri. So I set my alarm to wake me up this morning. There's different ways I can say that. Wake me up at 7 a.m. I'd like to be woken at 7 a.m. Set my alarm, for example. All those different ways of communicating are the next generation of how we talk to devices. If anyone drove a BMW from about the early 2000s, you're probably familiar with the voice interaction there, where you had to say a single word at a time. Intent matching is what we're all used to now with any of our home automation tools. And we can use this for the contact center. The way we're using this here is just making a really simple IVR. So rather than saying, please choose from the following option, we've just asked the customer why they've called. And we can then reduce from what they've said where they need to go. If they've asked something really simple, such as, is there parking available? We're actually going to respond with a node that says, yes, we've got parking. This is how you book it. If they're asking for opening hours, we're going to automate that reply. If they ask to speak to our sales team, we're going to forward them over to an agent. So we can make sure our agents are actually using their specialized skills effectively, and we're using AI to actually answer the rest of the simple interactions. Now, this is a static configuration, but we can also very easily connect to any back-end data you have. So if you have data in a place that sets your opening hours, let's use that as a query point. Let's also use that to set how your contact center works. If we have information such as CRM, we can use that at this point when the call comes through to check who their agent, who their assigned account manager is. Even if we don't ultimately route the call through to that person, we can still use that data whenever it does need to be transferred through. So generally, anything that has even a community node built or a label or has a open REST API, we can integrate and use this. And all of this can be done with professional services without having to rely on development timescales and sprints to align and things like that. This is also something very powerful if you're a partner. This is an option to actually give that extra value to customers while having that flexibility, while also having a contact center that does work out the box. So finally, we're going to have a quick look at our reporting within Power BI. Now, I'm sure no one wants to go through reports piece by piece. If you do want to see that, come and find us on our stand. We'll happily take you through this. But this is going to show you how much data we're actually capturing. Now, Power BI has become a very popular line of business tool recently. We give you some reporting templates out the box. Again, this is something that can be easily transformed or customized for you by partners or in-house staff that have the right skills. So rather than go through all of this, we're actually going to jump into what we call our overview, and we'll show you just how much data we do capture. So this is our report that we use to actually find an individual call, and we can view its journey. So I'm just going to scroll down and pick any off this list and do a drill through, and we'll show you all the data that we do have available for us. So let's wait for that to surface. Now on the left, you can see the journey this call has had. We can see the call being received. We can see it was identified as an incoming call. We can see when it was identified for the UCC. We can see when it's gone into the IVR, and we can see where it's entered the queue. This shows queue position 0 because it entered an empty queue. We can see the option that's been chosen. We see when we go to being in a queue phase. We see we start hunting. We can see the agent's name who answers the call. We can see the media channel open, the call finish. We can see who hangs up first. In this case, it was the agent rather than the customer. And we can see the recording being saved. On the right-hand side, we've got some easy access data fields too. Every single call that comes in gets, or any single dialogue that comes in, I should say, gets its own unique ID if you want to pull this up and align it to another report you might need to do. We also have some options here for agent management. So we have a link to the call recording. We also have the option for creating a SharePoint URL. SharePoint survey, sorry. So every call that comes in can have data fields attached to it that can then be populated by a supervisor if they're doing, for example, some spot checking. That can then notify an agent, and they're able to go back and see what's being put against them. So quite a lot of data being captured. It's up to you how you surface it. If we went through and showed you all the reports, you'd probably see some good stuff in there you liked, but if there isn't anything that you do see out of our box, we can very easily update it for you. So that's probably enough from what we had to show you today. We like to keep this nice and short. So we'd love to open up for any questions you have. Please feel free to make them as difficult as you need to. But yeah, over to you on the floor. So thank you very much.
All right, if you have any questions. Oh, just a second. All right, if you have any questions, we have a little box to throw around you can speak into. We prefer to do that for remote attendees, and for the remote attendees, use the raise hand feature in Teams if you have a question. Any questions?
Incoming.
Oops, sorry.
Hey, so obviously you demoed a way of getting a call in. It came in via PSTN. Is there any way of getting a call in that doesn't come through PSTN? Is there any way through just a regular Teams call for someone that might be in the organisation?
Yeah, so at the moment, all our calls come in via direct routing. What we've done to be able to get around some of those restrictions on internal calls is set up an internal Teams call queue that goes out to the number for the contact center. You can sort of keep that internally so it can go out via SIP and come back in, but there's not necessarily a way to do that natively at this point. There is some cool stuff coming up, but can't talk about it.
Is that Microsoft API related effectively?
Can't talk about it, I'm afraid.
Okay.
But, maybe 5 minutes not being recorded later.
The reason I ask is we've got, if you think about India people on location-based routing, they can't make phone calls when they're at home. Everyone's now at home. They can't reach the service desk. So that's kind of where I'm getting at with that. So.
Okay, so sorry, you're talking about Teams users at home who can't come out. Okay,
because they can't make calls from home or receive calls from home.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, we'll talk about some of our roadmap stuff later. But yeah, cool. That's a good question. Thanks.
Anyone else?
Here you go.
Thanks. Going back to what you were showing us, the Dialog Studio, what are the options around debugging that? So if you come up with a number of scenarios, but in real life, people are asking different questions or taking different actions that you didn't expect, how do you surface that information and how do you react to it so that you can make it better?
Yeah, of course. So it's worth saying the heavy lifting in the scenario where you say we have a bot is a cloud bot framework. So if you're using, for example, Azure Cognitive Services, they will log mismatched information. We also have a diagnostics view within Dialog Studio that will come back and report if there's been a mismatch. So there is some data logging that does happen if you need to do that.
So you mentioned about the recording and how about compliance. Is it compliant to MiFID standards or not?
No, so if you do need sort of PCI descoping, a lot of our customers use your descoping service to do, for example, DTMF entry to make sure it doesn't reach the contact center. So our data center itself isn't PCI certified, so we generally outsource that to those third parties for that service.
Is there anything on your roadmap to make it into that kind of,
so not at the moment. So what we're sort of looking at the moment is a recording API that allows it to automatically pause and resume, so you're not relying on the agent. But generally, we've seen those DTMF descoping things being the most successful for customers at the moment.
Okay, so you'd still need a compliant call recording system on top. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, hi. You mentioned that all the data is held within the customer tenant.
That's right.
Would they be able to access and manipulate that data on an E3 license?
So which data are you talking about particularly?
Well, the data from the contact center that you will throw into.
So for SQL, Azure SQL as a service, that isn't included under E3 anyway, so that's generally a prerequisite we require, but they would be able to access it. So we say it's your data, you can access it. Obviously, don't go in and change the entire database layout because we might struggle to put data in it. But yeah, there's no restriction on how they can access it. In terms of the reporting in Power BI with E3, you might need the bolt-on to actually have the right version of Power BI to be able to access that. But yeah, there's no restriction as far as we're concerned in terms of accessing your own data.
Okay.
Okay, with no other questions, we'll close it out for our remote attendees. Thank you everyone for joining and look forward to seeing you in other sessions.